All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, live audience, virtual audience. I am truly excited to be talking to Danielle Trussoni on her first visit to the Poison Pen with her second book for her interesting character who she can develop for you. He has a medical condition that makes him a extraordinary puzzle solver, but that's not all, right?
That's right. So, yes, his name is Mike Brink. He was in The Puzzle Master, the book that I wrote before this
Mm-hmm.
one. And he suffers from something called savant syndrome, which is a condition that's real. It's a medical condition. Only about 50 to 75 people in the world actually have this. But it's when someone experiences a traumatic brain injury and there's a kind of hyperplasticity that happens to the brain, and the person who has the brain injury develops a really particular skill. So, for example, one account that I read about this is a man was actually struck by lightning, and he wakes up in his hospital bed, and he's fine. He seems fine, can think and act exactly the way he did, but he felt this strange compulsion to play the piano, to listen to music, and he wasn't a musician. And so, he went home, and then the next week, he found himself going to a music store and sort of tinkling on the piano and like, playing around with it. The next week, he felt he needed to. He bought a piano, and within 6 months, he was composing music, and he had developed a very strong interest and talent in playing music. So Mike Brink has a traumatic brain injury, and the result of that is that he sees the world as patterns. He can solve puzzles instantly. It's almost like the answers just sort of flood into his brain. He has synesthesia, so he sees colors and hears sounds when he sees letters and speaks. And he has a photographic memory, so he can, read a book in, I don't know, 15 minutes and retain 99% of everything that he reads, which is completely fascinating to me.
I
So,
was so envious, I have to
yeah, I
say,
know.
in many respects. Although,
Wouldn't we all love that?
well, yeah, but in many ways, it's a difficult thing because it's the world. Most people don't experience the world that way, and he needs to slow down if he can, but he really can't.
Right. Well, so that's exactly what you just said, Barbara, is exactly why I'm writing about this character, because he's vulnerable. He's not like Superman. He doesn't, it's a superpower, but it's something that makes him extremely damaged. And while he's a sort of perfect person to come in and solve a crime that revolves around a puzzle or a mystery or a cipher, he's also someone that really struggles just to stay even. And this book opens with the one person who's sort of managed to help him stay even. His doctor, who has been working with him ever since the traumatic brain injury when Mike Brink was 17, is murdered. And that sets off a whole sequence of events.
Very true. Although some of the players appeared in the Puzzle Master, the
Yes.
first book in this series. So Danielle says she owes a debt, or rather, a mentor for her was Dan Brown, and there certainly are some Da Vinci Code aspects to this. This particular story, I think, which involves the Japanese imperial family and lots of history. And I've been to Japan several times, and I'm going back again in. This may be your friend.
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Come and join us.
Hi.
Going back to because we want to go to Hokkaido, but
Oh, Hokkaido is gorgeous.
it really is. But we have spent time in Kyoto, so I can, really familiar with the territory that you're writing about. In fact, I'm wearing my vest from Kyoto, my sort of kimono vest.
It's beautiful.
It really is nice, isn't it? I don't get to wear it that often, but
I
I'm
love
very
it.
fond of it. So I thought it was interesting that the book really writes about real people. I mean, I'm assuming the Japanese imperial family is not going to come at you, but
Well,
at the
one
same
never
time,
knows.
I did think it was interesting that, this was them, and this was an actual situation they have faced.
Yeah, so all of the books that I write, the Puzzle Master, the Puzzle Box, but also my other novels have real historical events and information. I'm really interested in doing the research. But just to sort of tell people what the setup for this book is, so Mike Brink is invited by the imperial family of Japan to open a 19th century puzzle box. And it's not just any puzzle box. It is a big, deadly puzzle box that has killed every person who's tried to open it in the last 150 years.
Right. Well, what she means by that is it's booby trapped.
It's
I mean, the
booby-trapped.
box itself does not sit up and shoot, but
No, it doesn't
Um,
explode. Well, it could, maybe. He doesn't know.
No, there's that
Yeah.
possibility, but it is incredibly well booby trapped. But before we get there, let's go back and talk about the Puzzle Master for a
Sure.
moment, because there's a carryover entity now, was a character, now an entity
Right.
that is important in your story.
Yes, so that is the villain. And his name is Jameson Sedge. And he begins, as you say, human. I don't want to spoil too much for people who haven't read The Puzzle Master, but he evolves into a kind of digital consciousness that is secured globally by blockchain. And so he's this AI entity. Well, I guess I did just totally spoil it for everybody. That's what happens to this guy. But by the time we get to the puzzle box, this villain is kind of everywhere and nowhere at once. And Mike Brink is facing him because this character, Jameson Sedge, is allied with this group called the Faction that is trying to get what's inside that box. Right.
So the box is the key, this particular box. But she warms us up in this book. Now, I want to tell you that I'm a crossword puzzle fan and a Wordle fan and all the rest of it. But I think it was in the Puzzle Master, not in this book. It is in the Puzzle Master. You have a crossword puzzle in a chrysanthemum form.
That's in this one.
Oh, it is in this one.
Yeah. It's right in the beginning.
I guess I wrote in the arc. I didn't
Yeah.
want to write in an actual book. And I have to tell you, it was so much fun to work at, yeah, there it is. See if I can put this down. But it's shaped like a flower, and the words curve. So it's really
Yeah.
complicated to do it because, you have to go one this way and one that way, whatever. I was really proud of myself.
And you'd
that
finished the
I
whole thing?
did.
That's
I
amazing.
did. I was really delighted. When I travel, which is fairly often, every once in a while I sit down and do crossword puzzles because I miss them. But I've never seen one like that. Where did you get the chrysanthemum puzzle?
I work with two puzzle constructors. So in both the Puzzle Master and this book, the plot points have puzzles. Some of the plot points have puzzles. So meaning when you solve a number puzzle or a word puzzle, or in this case, in this book, there's a tangram, Japanese puzzle. When you solve it, you get information that helps you move through the book. And you don't need to be able to solve it. You can still, read over it. But so I'm not good at puzzles. I love Wordle. I do crosswords, but I'm not a genius. I'm not a Mike Brink level puzzle genius. But there are two that I work with. One is a guy is named Brandon Emmett Quigley, and the other is a man named Wawei Wang. And they are both incredibly smart puzzle people. Brandon did the crossword that you just talked about. He's also he works for the New York Times game page and does crosswords for them. And Weiwa is a 4-time world puzzle champion. And he's just a genius. So
Mike
those
Brink-
guys are like building puzzles for the books.
Wonderful. Mike Brink was actually injured in a high school football game. He was set to be a professional, or at least a college star, and got derailed by a concussion, which has led to this brain plasticity and the whole bit. So the question then arises, what's he doing for money? And she just touched on that. He actually is a professional puzzle maker for the New York Times and other entities.
Yes.
And he prefers to live by himself in an apartment. But here's the thing: there's a great dog. There's a great dachshund named Connie, and Connie is at risk in this book. We won't tell you how or why, but that's a real heart stopper.
Yes, it's hard.
It was cruel
I
of
have
you.
I have readers who email me as they're reading saying nothing better happened to Connie.
Kill
And I'm
everybody
like,
but the dog is
okay.
kind of a standard rule in crime.
Yeah, no, you can't hurt the dog. And Connie's full name is Conundrum, right? But he calls her Connie. So, and I'll tell you a little behind the scenes info. For my birthday last year, my husband bought me a real Connie.
How wonderful.
So I have a dachshund that looks just like the one in the book named Connie.
And you didn't bring him on tour?
I could not bring Connie on tour.
I'm
It's hard
sorry.
enough to get myself from place to place.
Yeah. No, I hear you. Traveling with the dog is not easy. But anyway,
Connie does not have enough social media. Connie appears occasionally on my social media, but I feel like Connie should get her own. I think you're right. I think
anyway, the dog's great. So one of the many reasons that you will enjoy reading the book. I do recommend reading The Puzzle Master first. It's not that the story isn't complete, but I do think if you have not read The Puzzle Master, that there are some spoilers in this book that if you then go back to The Puzzle Master, would be, for
Yeah.
example, we all know now about Jameson Sedge.
Right.
And the first book, in some respects, is kind of a gothic haunted house kind of a scenario.
there's elements of that.
Yeah,
yes.
which I
Yeah.
thought were really lots of fun. Perfect
Yeah.
for the scary season.
That's true. It's a good
Yeah.
time to read that book.
So we have copies of that here, just in case. But anyway, Japan. So you lived in Japan or spent a lot of time in Japan. Is that why you chose it for the background for
Well,
this?
so I lived in Japan for 2 years and have wanted to write a book about Japan ever since. But I just couldn't find the right setup. And I've always been fascinated with puzzle boxes. And then I developed this character, Mike Brink, who solves puzzles, and it all just sort of came together. But even though I lived there for 2 years and know quite a bit about Japan, I went back last year for 2 weeks to actually go to the places that are in this book. So we went to Tokyo. We went, sort of walked around near the Imperial Palace. You can't actually get in to the Imperial Palace. And then went to Kyoto and Hakone and went all over the place, sort of just visiting, which was a good thing because for me, when I'm writing about a place, I like to have seen it, partially because I often realize, actually, no, that can't go in the book, this place. Like, for example, there were maybe 5 or 6 locations that I had planned to write about, but when I went there, I was like, this would never work for this scene. So I cut it and found something else. So I think that a lot of people like to do research online, right? Looking at pictures and just sort of imagining it. But for me, I like to actually go there.
Well, I think it does make the book feel, authentic. Is that the right word? I guess it's the right word.
I hope
Anyway,
so. I hope you feel like you're there.
Well, I did because, as I said, I have been there. One of my favorite places in Japan is Nara, which was the old capital before Kyoto, and Kyoto was the capital before Tokyo, known as Edo back in the day. There was a wonderful Japanese mystery series by Laura Jo Rowland. Do you remember that? It was like 16 books or something, and it all took place after the Tokugawa, but we were still in Edo. I mean, it was, and you still had the emperor, but you also had the shogun, but not the original, not Ieyasu, but the later one. And it was incredible how much Japanese history and geography that you learn from reading that series.
I have to read that. I haven't read it.
I think you probably have to find them in ebooks now. I'm not even sure they're in print, but they were terrific. Really, really good. She herself is Japanese, do you think? Yeah. Laura Jo she's still writing, but something different now. But anyway, having read that's probably the reason I was so eager to go to Japan the first time.
Yeah, Japan is a wonderful place, and it has, for me anyway, it had this quality where it just I wanted to keep going back. I lived there for 2 years as a teacher when I was.
Was that what you were doing?
Yeah, I was teaching English in a high school in a tiny, tiny village in Kyushu.
Were you?
Yes, and it was like the teachers' housing, these sort of concrete block housing, some rice paddies, some mountains in the school.
Were you
And
anywhere?
me walking around and people sort of staring at me like, who the hell are you?
Kyushu is a fascinating island. We
It's
were
gorgeous.
lucky enough to get there. What's the capital city where the
Fukuoka.
right? No, not Fukuoka. Sorry, halfway
Um,
down the island on the west coast.
Kurame? No, there's Nagasaki, Kurame.
It'll come to me. Not Nagasaki either. There's a anyway. We got there during cherry blossom season, and at night,
Oh, wow.
the castle was you could tour it all at night with the lights on the
Uh-huh.
cherry blossoms, and it was south of the volcano. Remember where the big volcano
Yeah.
park is?
Yes.
It'll come to me
Yeah.
at some point.
I don't,
what it
I
was.
don't know.
Yeah.
But
Fukuoka is another legendary story in my family. I thought I'm addicted to pottery, and there is a pottery trail. And I thought Fukuoka was like a little tiny fishing village. Turns out they'd bid for the Olympics. So, it
They're
was
huge.
anything but a tiny fishing village. So my husband and I rented a car in Kyushu and drove all the way up,
so, I've been on that I used to collect Japanese
Right.
pottery, the kind of crackling at the
Right.
bottom. That was the stuff that I was collecting.
And there's a brilliant museum
Yeah.
of pottery somewhere along. Anyway, we had to return. I've always remembered this. We had to return our rental car in Fukuoka, and we had a piece of paper with directions on it that they had given us all the way down in Kagoshima, wherever it is, the city at the bottom of the island. We don't have any English involved here at all. And we are running out of gas, and so we suddenly realize we're in this giant metropolis, Fukuoka, and we find a service station, and they translate for us that the car has to go back to the train station.
Oh.
So
at least
we
you could get
found our
there.
way to the train station, but the trouble was the train station was under construction. So we circle around the train station 2 or 3 times, and we are completely unable to figure out how to get to and the clock is ticking because we have to have the car back by 8 o'clock. So I said to Rob, give me 10,000 yen or whatever. No, is it yen?
That's about yen.
Yeah,
That's about
okay. Give me
$100.
10,000 yen, I said. And I leapt out of the car, went to the taxi stand, and I had the piece of paper with directions and my 10,000 yen, and he figured it out. So I got into the taxi, and Rob followed the taxi.
Oh, brilliant.
And he took us around.
Before GPS, right?
No kidding. And eventually up to the second floor of the car park at the train station where the rental car return was. And it's now like 2 minutes to 8, So, and Rob said to me, don't let the taxi leave.
Hold it.
Keep
hold
him
that
there,
taxi.
whatever. So the taxi driver was getting into the whole thing. So they unloaded all the luggage, and we got it into the taxi, waved the rental car people goodbye, and and I had booked a room for us, and I think it was a Ritz-Carlton in Fukuoka, but it turns out there are 3. So the taxi driver, asked, which Ritz-Carlton are we actually going to? We
This
have
story
no
is
idea.
like just how it always was for me, right? Especially now I went back and there's a lot of English, like there's a lot of Romaji, right? There's a lot of
more.
underneath the kanji.
And maybe in a GPS you can
And
switch
you can
from
also
kanji to
use-
English, but you
right.
couldn't back then.
And you can also use Google Translate. There's all these tools now. But back then when I was there, it was the same with you. I would get on a bus and I would be like, okay, I think this is the right bus. I'm sort of translating this, these kanji. And sometimes I would end up like across the prefecture. I would just end up wherever. So it was really every day was an adventure.
It is an adventure. And now they're doing luxury trains. Have you seen them on Instagram? There are luxury trains now from Tokyo to Kyoto, and luxury trains to Nara from Kyoto
No,
to
I mean,
Nara.
I took the bullet train, but I don't think
No,
that.
these are entirely different. These have food, and they have
Oh, no, I
they're
haven't seen
gorgeous.
that.
So I was thinking about Mike because there is a train scene in this book.
Yes.
And I thought it would have been fun for Mike and Connie. Connie's not with us at this point.
Yeah,
To have
Connie's not
taken
there.
the luxury train to
that would have
Kyoto.
been nice. I'm sure. I would like to take the luxury train.
Right.
Maybe I should go back and take the luxury train.
Well, we're going back next year, so I'll
You
let
have
you
to
know
let
how
me
it all
know how
works
it
out.
goes.
Yep, I know. It's trains are making talk about digression. Here we are. Luxury trains are making a comeback. They're all over now. You can go from Bangkok to Kuala Lumpur. You can go. There's a Al Andalus train that goes from Malaga now to Seville. I mean, it's
Amazing.
amazing.
We need them here in the United States. Come on, let's get luxury
Well,
trains here.
isn't there a thing going on about having an Amtrak return to, yeah, they moved it to Maricopa, 40 miles away for unknown reasons, and closed Union Station. But I think there's now a move to bring
Oh,
Amtrak
great.
back, and I'm really hoping that we're going to see train service in your lifetime, if not my own, to Tucson and, L.A., and even to Flagstaff would be great. Because right now you can take the Amtrak from Chicago to Flagstaff, but then you have to take a bus to Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
Kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah, very anticlimactic.
So anyway, Mike is asked if he can take on the challenge of opening the Meiji era box.
Puzzle box, yes.
Puzzle box, right. Meiji was the emperor of Japan who eliminated the shogun and brought Japan kind of, it was what, in the early 1800s?
1848.
48, okay. Japan had turned away from the West. The shogun had really isolated it. What culture there was really largely derivative of China, wasn't it? But anyway, he opened up Japan. Lots of French influence, French clothing, French food, so forth, and all. A lot of artists exchange. Japanese artists went to Paris and all the rest of it. And so the emperor is now back in charge for the first time since 16 whatever.
Right. And that's the sort of backdrop of this. I mean, this is a contemporary novel, but because the puzzle box that Mike is going to open was created then, there's a lot of sort of information about what was happening woven in. Also, there's this strand that is really important to me and that I wanted to emphasize in the story about the female empresses that are part of the that family line, right? So in Japanese mythology, or actually, if you get right down to the legend, Amaterasu, who was the sun goddess, is the very founding member of the Japanese imperial family. And there's a lot of discussion in Japan now, and in somewhat in this book, about the lineage of the Japanese imperial family. And actually, I have a friend who's a monarchy nut. She can tell you what Kate Middleton is wearing every day, basically. And I started talking to her about this book, and I'm like, it has a lot to do with the Japanese imperial family and the succession. There's a princess who's supposed to succeed to the throne. And she's like, what? And so now she's watching the Japanese imperial family too. But there's a lot of that in this book. But in order to sort of understand the climax, you have to understand a little bit about Japanese history, which is why I have that layered into the book.
How many were there? 7?
I think there were 8.
8?
8 empresses before, because in the 19th century, actually, it was absolutely okay for women to rule in Japan. In the 19th century, Meiji instigated primogeniture with male-only succession, which has made things very complicated because right now there's only one heir and she's female. And so they're like bending over backwards to find somebody else. But, my opinion is they should just let her do it. They obviously. And 80% of Japanese agree that she should actually inherit the throne.
Does she want to inherit the throne?
Nobody knows. Nobody's asking her. And, the imperial family is very private.
Yeah.
Like nobody, my Japanese publisher, when they read this manuscript, I think they're kind of biting their nails wondering what the Japanese imperial family might think or what people might think. Because I had lunch with my editor in Tokyo when I was there last year. And actually it was my agent who said this, that people don't write about the emperor. They don't write about the imperial family. Like nobody really discusses it. It's in gossip columns and there's speculation, but nobody actually writes a novel where the emperor is a character, which this book, the emperor is a character.
If I remember right, when Hirohito had to sign the treaties that ended World War II and all, didn't he give up his divine status as part of that?
He had to.
Yeah,
that was part
exactly.
of that was the surrender treaty.
Yep.
And so technically, no, he's no longer divine. But before that, 2,000 years before that, since Amaterasu, this sun goddess, gave them these implements, which are also in the book, they were considered divine. Yeah.
No. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, there's a
in,
lot. I
modernizing
feel like we
Japan.
just covered a lot in this book. You know,
We
that's
did.
in this book.
Right. So anyway, it is sort of a Da Vinci Code in its way, but there's some really wonderful history in it, and a great dog, and a really interesting character. Are you going to continue to write about him?
I hope so. I would like to. Yes. Yeah.
Meaning we have to wait and see what your publisher says.
Meaning we have to. I have to wait and see what my publisher says. If this book sells well, they will definitely give me another contract to do more in that in this series. If not, then I'll have to do something else. But I'm really hoping that I can do more.
Well, there are other roads to publishing. So
That's true.
you
I
know.
know. There's so many options now. So
There really are. You know,
Yeah.
once you dig into it, right?
yeah.
So, anybody have questions about the book?
I have a question. Most authors are very approachable, but I'm curious how you established such a strong relationship with Dan Brown.
I don't have such a strong relationship with Dan Brown. So I met him. I am on the council of the Authors Guild in New York, and we were doing a fundraiser at Dan Brown's house, and he and I became friends that way. And then there were a couple of other instances where I accompanied him, for example, at a conference, and then last year we were at Iceland Noir with his girlfriend and a whole group of us, and we all were spending time together. But no, I mean, we're friends. There's not a writing connection because I have read his books, but I came to them late. My first book, my first novel, Angelology, a lot of people would read it and say, oh, this reminds me of Dan Brown, but I had never read a Dan Brown book. So I was like, well, that's interesting. And so when I met him, I said, oh, you're the guy everybody keeps saying that my books are like. And he, of course, had never read mine. Since then, I have read his books, and we've talked about them and that sort of thing. But I like to think that my books are really different than his. You know, people put it in that category because
you're the one who mentioned it in the book, or I
Yeah.
would probably not have brought it up.
Yeah, well, that's because other people have mentioned it, and also I think it's a compliment, right? I think that's a compliment, but I think that my books are really different than his, but that there are enough similarities that I get dropped in that basket. Because it's not really, a hardcore crime novel. It is a thriller, but there's lots of lore and history, and that's what he does. So
I know. There's
yeah.
a puzzle, and there's history,
Right,
and there's
right,
a
right.
quest.
Right.
All
So
those good
it's
things.
kind of in the same basket, which is great. But we're not as close as one might think.
Right. Yep. Anything online, Patrick?
Well, actually, I was going to ask if you could tell us a little bit more about the puzzle box itself.
Yes.
Ooh, it's so cool.
Yes. So the puzzle box is made from, I believe, 7 hardwoods taken from an ancient forest in Hakone, Japan. And I actually visited a puzzle box workshop where I saw one being made. And these trees are all different colors. The woods are all different colors, and they're cut in a way. So they're layered on top of each other, and they're cut in a way that here, I'm going to put my microphone down. The woods are put together in a block, and they're compressed, and then they're sliced very thin, and that layer of wood is what's put on top of the boxes. It's like lacquer. It almost looks like lacquer. And in the novel, there's a puzzle constructor who was something of a sadist, I guess you could say. And he made this box that was supposed to be unopenable, basically. You can't, there is a way in, but you might lose a finger, or you might get arsenic, in your lungs as you open it. So it was really fascinating making, fictionalizing this and constructing it in my imagination. But there's a guy here in the United States, I think he lives in Portland, named Kagan Sound, who actually makes these beautiful, elaborate puzzle boxes. And I interviewed him before I wrote this book. He sent me some pictures. I went on his Instagram and completely just, went crazy looking at all of his pictures. And then we had a conversation. I spoke to him for a couple of hours and I took notes about how you actually make it. So all of that's in the book. It's
So
Japanese.
is the box designed to contain, call it a treasure for lack of anything else? In somewhere in the heart of the box there is a
in the
thing.
story. Well, in the story, it was
No,
designed.
but I mean in just any puzzle box.
Originally, so in the 19th century, they acted as safes in some ways, right? Like it was a secure way to lock up money or jewelry or whatever. But now it's a game, right? Kids play open puzzle boxes and people collect puzzle boxes because they're fun. It's just a game.
So it's kind of a Rubik's Cube
It's kind of like a Rubik's Cube now. Yeah. It's a mechanical
Anyway,
puzzle.
this one is a deadly puzzle box, deadly Rubik's Cube, and whatever is concealed inside it that the Meiji Emperor put inside it is what people are trying to discover.
Yes, exactly.
How far back do these things go?
About 125, 45 years. Around the Meiji period, right, which is why I was able to sort of simultaneously have a puzzle box made then. But there have been a few key puzzle box makers that were a little bit later, like 1925. But anyway, it's fiction, so I moved stuff around a little bit.
Why is it a relatively late thing? Because Elizabethan, there used to be chests that people just, and the locks for the chests were actually the puzzle.
I
they
don't know
didn't
why.
just have an ordinary key. You had to figure out how to unlock them.
Yeah.
So the puzzle box itself is smooth, right? The
Completely
exterior,
smooth.
of the wood is completely smooth, and the question is, what do? Do you press here or do there or whatever? And then if something opens up, then what? And
Yeah, you know what? So I have a surprise in my bag.
oh,
that I
you
just-
do? Do you have a puzzle box?
I do, that I forgot that I brought, but I'm gonna pull
Oh,
it out.
how exciting! All right.
I bought this in Japan when I was there.
Is a puzzle box really a Japanese thing?
So this is a real puzzle box.
Okay.
And and if you look at it, you can see that it moves just a fraction of an inch.
Okay.
This one, you need to move these pieces 21. There's 21 moves. Like we're really nerding out on the puzzle box. We're really getting, that. But I love this
So
stuff.
it's the
right?
sequence of
So
the
it's
moves.
the sequence of moves. Figuring out the sequence of moves is what you need to do in order to, the top pops off at the end. The top slides off. And I've opened this, it's 21 moves. I need instructions. I'm not Mike Brink, right? So his job is to figure it out, right? And the one that he opens is 72 moves, right? So you can imagine how difficult that is. And every move could set off something, right? So there's, in the puzzle box in the novel, he moves one of these and there's an opening and you have to insert your finger in to push the next piece, but there's a guillotine in there, and if you push it the wrong way, you lose a finger. Right. So
And people have failed at this before Mike, I might add. He is
right.
There is a history of people who've tried to open this box and have lost a finger or died or whatever. So
right. Everyone.
Yep.
Actually, everyone.
right. Nobody.
Noxious fumes laced
Right.
with arsenic. Terrible things. Terrible things happen. Spikes. Fukigagi, I think they're called. They're poison darts.
Yeah.
Poison darts come out. I mean, it's a nasty box,
That's really fascinating.
isn't it? That's
Yeah.
beautiful, isn't it? I got that in
Right.
Hakone. So when I was talking about that layer of wood with the different colors, these were constructed with like pencil-sized pieces of wood that go into a box that are compressed and then shaved off. So this is a thin layer of that wood on top.
But the pieces that move, they are faced too, right? So
Yeah.
so they right now when it's this way, it's off kilter, but I don't know if you can see it. When it's pushed back in, then the pattern of this is good.
Yeah.
And so if you moved it a little further, that's what you're talking about, where you put your finger in.
All that's in that's my imagination.
Well, that's okay. I think
You know, the sticking your finger in.
really fascinating, right?
I'm glad that I remembered I brought it.
I'm glad you did too. I mean, because I was trying to see it as kind of a Rubik's Cube, which I might say I've never personally solved one. Have you? A Rubik's Cube?
No, my wife Sandra does them.
Really?
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It's amazing. You see these super genius kids
Oh.
that, like, do it in 5 seconds.
I know. Well, Mike Brink can do it in 12.
Mike is really, that's what he does. I
He
know.
can
He
do it in
just
12
sort of
seconds.
sees the pattern. I mean, it's really an interesting character to read about. And it does, I mean, it is a superpower. Do you remember Jefferson T. Jeff had a character that has synesthesia in one of his books?
Oh, really?
Yeah, there was, I can't remember if he was born or was injured. I think there was an injury involved there too where the guy developed, but it was only synesthesia. It wasn't anything else. But it really distorted his life as a consequence because he had these perceptions that, nobody else could share.
Well, after I wrote The Puzzle Master, I discovered that because I sent the book to David Baldacci, and David Baldacci has a character from Memory Man who had something similar. And he wrote me back after I sent it to him, and he was like, this is really interesting. And this, gave me a blurb. And then I read Memory Man, and I was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea that you had written a character like that. And so I wrote him back and said, this is a really funny coincidence because I hadn't read Memory Man before I wrote this. And I think he thought I was going to him for a blurb because of Memory Man. So that's
I can
another,
see that.
I don't know. It's very interesting how that works, how the imagination works. People hit on ideas and they're similar but not similar. And I think, for me, Mike Brink and having that condition made him a kind of perfect vehicle for solving mysteries and crimes.
Absolutely.
And I think that must have occurred to, obviously, David Baldacci, too.
Well, David writes many characters. I'm going to be talking to him. Actually, we're doing a preview conversation for his November book at the end
great.
of October. Yeah, I always like talking to David. He's a really interesting guy.
Yeah.
And he likes developing characters that have, different skills or in different places. The new book's going to be in Seattle, if I remember. It's the 620 Man. Is that the Memory Man?
No, it's
It's
different.
a different guy,
Yeah,
right?
it's a different guy. Yes. Different series.
Anyway, I'm glad you brought the box, too, because I think it's very cool to be. And what's inside it?
So I put something in there.
Just so it would rattle?
So it would rattle. No, I put a Japanese coin in there.
Ah.
But now I can't get it out because I don't remember how to open it. So I have to get I have the instructions somewhere.
Oh, good. So it came with this. Is
It
how
came
to
with some
open the
instructions,
box?
of course, otherwise I would never be able to
I
open
see.
it because I'm really not a puzzle
And
person.
were they in kanji or were they in English?
They were just a diagram.
Oh, a diagram.
Like,
okay, push here
Push
and
here,
do that and
push here.
all the rest of it.
And my mom and I, when I came back from Japan, my mom and I sat and opened it.
I
It took
see.
us a long time.
Yeah, that's really clever. Right. Anybody else? Are there any online questions?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about some of the neurological stuff you were talking about at the beginning? How far down in the weeds did you go in research?
That's such a good question. I went pretty far down into the weeds. I found a doctor named Dr. Treffert who had a clinic in Wisconsin. He worked with the man who Rain Man is based on, and he specialized in people who had savant syndrome, which is what Mike Brink has. It's called savant syndrome, and he had I read all sorts of theories about what he thought was going on, right? Because he actually, one of his theories or one of the things that was discussed, he gets very technical, but one thing that stuck with me is that he likened the human brain to a radio that you could tune. And then when there's an injury, the frequency and the tuning expands or breaks down, and that his savants, these guys, it's mostly men for some reason who have savant syndrome, they're picking up other frequencies. So it totally like turned the idea of how we learn on its head, rather than that we read something and retain it, that you're just sort of picking it up, which was, I think, the most out there theory about this that I read. But I read, lots of neurological explanations for it. I read a bunch of memoirs of people who actually suffer from this. There's a book called Born on a Blue Day, because this person who has savant syndrome sees days as colors, and another skill that some people develop is they can remember the day of, like, you say 1812 on Wednesday, and they can tell you the day, like the date. Like, it's this kind of memory that retrieval that people have. So part of the difficulty for me writing this was how much information to include, because I like to go really in the weeds with research, and I could just, fill lots of chapters with this, but it's not as interesting, right? So, compressing it, making it sort of
You have
fit
to
into
give
the
enough
story.
to make it plausible and understandable
Absolutely.
without
But also enough that people
overwhelming
can
people.
keep going.
I mean, basically the brain is an electrical system. I mean, your whole body is an electrical system. If you ever watch any of David Attenborough's movies about, other creatures in the world, and you recognize that one of them was really dramatic. He did it with filters and so forth, but it was, I don't remember if it was a lizard or what, but their vision is so different than ours. They see things in different colors. They, all kind. So it's just, our brain is how it is, but other brains in other creatures
yes.
have,
Yeah.
look at a dog. I mean, think about their sense of smell and think about their hearing.
And if we get knocked around, our brain changes too.
Well, but that's my point, is that, I think the brain probably keeps evolving.
Yeah.
But just because we see, it's like people who are colorblind. Why are they colorblind? Why can't they see, what is it, blue and yellow or red and green, whichever one, or maybe it's both, now that I think about it. Why? There's something that's just got slightly crossed.
Yeah.
Somewhere, whatever the eye
Right.
perceives. But what if instead you got fabulous night vision, or
It's fascinating. I'm really interested in this, like the different ways that we perceive and what consciousness is.
but we may be evolving in ways, AI is going to be a big part of that. When you put on these headsets and do stuff, you're basically changing your brain. You're changing your whole perception of reality once you do that.
Yeah.
And
Some like the superheroes, when they were coming up originally with some of these that had these very special skill sets. Do you think that they were maybe inspired by savants?
Could be.
Yeah,
Maybe.
certainly
I hadn't
possible.
thought of that, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
probably.
if you look at the Spider-Man history, for example, he has some kind of catastrophic accident. I can't remember what it is. And all of a sudden, he can climb, that,
Right.
that
It was
kind
something
of
in
thing.
a lab, I think, right?
Yeah,
There
that
you
was
go.
it. Right.
Thank you.
Right. I knew it was something traumatic. But anyway, and I mean, who's to say that, that kind of thing, maybe there's a particularly poisonous snake bite or something might really alter, we already know the terrible damage that concussions wreak on people, football players or people who,
Yeah.
was the actress that, skied into the tree and didn't pay attention. So the brain is a fragile thing, but it's also capable of evolving. So who knows?
Who
I
knows?
think AI
hundred
is a
years.
terrifying and fascinating construct. And if people get used to wearing headsets and will their brains evolve to match, so that maybe at some point they won't actually need the headset?
Maybe.
Well, I
Let's
mean,
see.
it's certainly a possibility.
Totally.
Machines can help you hear when your hearing interfaces disintegrate, or
Yeah.
I have retractable lenses planted in my eyes when I had cataract surgery. It's an option you get when they have to take out the cataract and the lens. You have a choice. So you have to pay extra, but I got retractable lenses, so I can actually read the front door from here,
It's amazing.
and I can also read your book from here. and all that's artificial. I wore glasses for forever, and it was entirely liberating to suddenly have this transplant.
Right. Well, I had a question last night at an event about transhumanism, right? And the villain in the book is a transhumanist, Sedge, and who evolves into a kind of AI. And that philosophy is that however we evolve, it's human, right? So because humans make AI, AI is an extension of human, and
Yeah, I
it's
mean, that's an
fine,
interesting theory.
right?
There was a really great book, Natasha Pulley was an extraordinarily interesting writer, wrote a book called The Mars House, and I talked to her.
Mm,
I usually do her American debuts on Zoom because she's in England. And basically, thesis of it is that our planet had become uninhabitable thanks to extreme weather, such as Florida, for example, would be a good example of how that might happen. And so colonies eventually got to Mars. And then how did they cope with the changes in gravity, for example, which really affect your skeleton, your because the gravity differences.
right,
But after a while, when people are born there and they used to it, then they're not as at risk.
right.
And so it's evolution in action. I
If
thought
only we
about that
could
when I
look
was
in
reading about
100 years
Florida.
and see.
At some point, what are we going to do?
What are we gonna
if
do?
if one day we have made this planet uninhabitable,
Yeah, it's.
where are we going,
I
if
know.
anywhere?
We have big questions.
Lots of big questions.
We have
Yeah.
many questions.
Right. Anything else?
Not really. Someone wants to know if you, Barbara, did you or do you see halos now?
Yes, and it's
I love it.
I never gotten entirely used to it. It's only when looking. It used to be that all of the lights would have halos, but now really it's just headlights at night. There's a sort of a blur around them. It takes a long time. It took me a long time to kind of adjust to that. So night driving was hard for me for a while, but I've gotten used to it. It's not an uncommon side effect of the refraction is different, in the lenses. But I mean, I'm not conscious that the lenses are working, that they're retracting and doing all the stuff they need to do for. It's really unnerving when they do the surgery, because they have to paralyze your eye, and then for a brief moment, because you have to be awake for it, they come at you, and there's this sort of horrifying moment when you think, "That's it," they're going to drill my eye out or something, but passes in a flash.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I see that.
Well, Arizona is actually the leader in cataract surgery because it's ultraviolet light that mostly causes cataracts. So some of the best
Yeah.
eye surgeons in the whole country are
Are
here
here.
in Arizona. Yeah. Um, so it's a good place to come if you want to have that surgery. But I mean, that's just a minor example of
Mm.
how the brain learns to deal
Adapts,
with,
right.
with these refracting. And I'm not conscious of that process at all. I mean, it's just carrying on, seeing things. And so there's Jeffrey Deaver over there, and, all of the stuff on the shelves, Patrick's books, and, Judith Starkson up there. And then, as I said, I can read the front door where it says, the poison pen, you know, 4014, or no, actually, Suite 101 is what it says. And I never could have done that.
Mm.
Even, I think, when I was a child before I went into glasses. I was like 9 or 10 when my eyes went. So amazing.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. Right. Well, thank you. It's
Well,
really
thank
been a
you.
fascinating conversation. Thank you very much, audience, for coming. Thank you, virtual audience, for joining us. And we do have autographed copies. This is our Crime Collector Book of the Month. And Danielle has signed. We don't have all that many left, actually, because you signed a load of them that are shipping
Yes.
out tomorrow to members of our subscription club. But I really love this book. I totally recommend it. And it's a nice package if you buy the Puzzle Master in paperback and then the puzzle box, I think. An excellent book for for young adults. I mean, it's intended for an adult audience,